You can almost feel it before you even see it, the thick, humid air of a southern plantation, clinging to your skin like a second layer. It carries with it that strange, almost intoxicating mixture of scents, the wet earth after a sudden summer rain, the smoke from a distant fire drifting lazily through the trees, and something sweeter, almost forbidden, that makes your stomach twist with both longing and fear. Imagine standing at the edge of a wooden veranda, your hands gripping the railing worn smooth by decades of sun and storm. The sky is bruised, purple and orange blending like some painter's careless masterpiece, and the crickets are singing their restless evening song. Somewhere far off, the uneven thump of a horse's hooves echoes across the fields, each beat vibrating in your chest. The world feels like it's holding its breath. Inside the grand plantation house, the air is thick with secrets. Every creak of the floorboards under a servant's bare feet, every muffled whisper from the kitchen, every shadow that clings to the ornate furniture seems to be alive with stories waiting to spill. And tonight, this story isn't about the master, nor about the cruel laws that bind them. No, tonight it's about two women, a mother and her daughter, whose lives had become so dangerously entangled with desire, jealousy, and forbidden love that even the walls seemed to hesitate before whispering their tale. Her name was Lillian. She moved with a quiet, almost imperceptible grace. You might have walked past her in the hall and thought nothing of it, only to turn around a moment later and realize she had been standing behind you the whole time. There was a fire in her eyes, a glint that spoke of survival, of knowledge, of having stared at danger so many times that it could no longer frighten her. She carried herself carefully, always measured, as if every step and every glance was a calculated choice in a game only she understood. And then there was Clara, her daughter, younger, reckless, radiant in a way that made her nearly impossible to ignore. She inherited her mother's beauty, the same smile that could illuminate the darkest corners of a room, and somehow the same dangerous spark. It was the kind of beauty and charm that drew people in, made them feel alive for a heartbeat, and then left them desperate, unbalanced, and sometimes broken. Now this is where the story begins to twist. Both Lillian and Clara were drawn to the same man. His name was Thomas. He was a slave, yes, but calling him that barely scratches the surface. Thomas carried himself with a quiet authority, a presence that demanded attention even when he tried to fade into the shadows. You might have missed him at first glance, because he moved deliberately, carefully, like a shadow passing through a room. But once he spoke, well, the room shrank around him. People whispered about his intelligence, his quiet charm, the way he could make a weary heart feel alive even for a fleeting moment. It began innocently enough, or at least it seemed so. Lillian had loved him first, in the stolen quiet moments behind the kitchens, in corners of the fields where no one dared follow. She would pass him food in secret, brush a stray lock of hair from his forehead, laugh softly at a joke no one else would understand. There was intimacy in those moments, a connection that could never be documented in any ledger, no matter how meticulous. Then Clara came of age, and she noticed him too. You see, youth has a way of burning brighter, faster, hotter than experience. Curiosity became longing, longing became fascination, and fascination, well, sometimes fascination becomes obsession. She saw the way Thomas carried the weight of the world on his shoulders, and yet, somehow, he had a softness reserved for moments she alone seemed to capture. Something in the way he looked at her made her pulse quicken, her breath hitch in ways that frightened and thrilled her at the same time. The plantation had rules, cruel, harsh rules, but hearts rarely obey rules. Love, desire, jealousy, they creep through cracks in the walls, hiding where fear and oppression cannot reach, and so a dangerous rhythm began. Lillian would steal moments with Thomas when she could, always careful, always watching, and Clara, well, she found ways too. Watching him from afar, tracing his movements in the fields, secretly laughing at the small, subtle ways he acknowledged her existence. At first, Lillian told herself it was innocence. Surely a daughter's admiration could not be dangerous. Surely curiosity alone could not threaten the delicate balance she had with Thomas. But then, subtle signs began to appear. A glance held too long, a laugh shared at an unspoken joke, the way Clara's hand would tremble when she wrote secret letters, tiny scraps of folded paper, tucked under floorboards, hidden in hollow logs, even slipped into the pages of books. And each letter, carefully preserved, carried the same looping handwriting, full of riddles and longing, notes that spoke to a connection no one else could see. The tension in the house became almost unbearable. Every meal, every chore, every passing moment felt loaded with unspoken words. It pressed down on everyone, making it harder to breathe, making the air itself seem heavier, thicker, almost tangible. Lillian tried to warn her daughter. "Be careful, Clara," she whispered one night, voice trembling between fear and something else, something like desperation. Some things, some people, they take more than they give. But Clara, in the audacity of youth, barely heard. She only felt the pull of Thomas as if he were a moon she could not resist orbiting. And then came the evening that changed everything. The air was different, heavier, almost electric. The lanterns inside the house flickered like they knew a secret. No one else did. Thomas had promised to meet Clara by the edge of the river, a secluded spot hidden from prying eyes where the moss grew thick and the water whispered secrets over the rocks. Lillian watched from the veranda, heart hammering, hands clutching the railing until her knuckles turned white. Every instinct screamed at her to call out, to run, to stop something she could not even name. Clara arrived, laughing softly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear as if unaware of the danger around her. Thomas leaned against a tree, his eyes dark, unreadable. For a moment, the world seemed to pause, the river's gentle murmur, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a whip, all frozen in that instant. Then he reached for her hand, and in that moment Lillian saw it, something she had not expected, not just desire but recognition and perhaps guilt or fear. The shadows grew longer, the night pressed down like a weight, and suddenly, they were gone. Vanished. Not together, not apart. Just gone. Lillian ran, screaming, calling her daughter's name until her voice broke, until her throat burned. She searched every corner, every hiding place, every inch of the plantation. But there was nothing, just the river, dark and endless, carrying secrets it would never speak aloud. And Thomas? He was gone too, leaving only the faint scent of tobacco and lilacs behind. The days turned into nights, nights into weeks, weeks into months. Letters stopped coming, footsteps ceased. The house, once alive with stolen glances and quiet laughter, became hollow, haunted by what had been. Lillian's grief carved itself into her bones. She moved through the rooms like a ghost, whispering Clara's name into the dust and shadows, hoping, somehow, that sound alone might summon her back. History rarely preserves these stories. Plantation ledgers and records tell us who owned what, who worked where, and who was traded for how much. But they do not capture a mother's whispered warning, the terror in a daughter's laugh, the longing in a man's touch. They do not tell us what it feels like to love and fear the same person, or how the loss of someone so precious can twist time itself. Fragments remained, a torn letter under a floorboard, faint finger impressions in the clay by the riverbank, a mother staring across the fields, searching for a child she might never see again. And in those fragments, in the whispers and echoes, we begin to glimpse the human heart, its resilience, its capacity for forbidden longing, its stubbornness to feel even when the world tells it not to. Because love is never simple. Desire never obeys morality or law. People will hurt, people will risk, people will disappear. But even in the darkness, there is memory. Even in absence, there is resonance. And sometimes the stories that survive in whispers and fragments are the ones that teach us the most, not about law or history, but about the fragile, dangerous, beautiful complexity of being human. The days after that night became a fragile, trembling routine. Lillian moved through the house like a shadow, eyes scanning every corner, ears straining for the softest footfall or the faintest rustle of fabric. Each creak of the floorboard sounded like a whisper from the past, reminding her that something precious had been taken. And yet, she could not stop herself from glancing toward the fields, toward the river, as though merely looking might summon Clara back into her arms. Clara, wherever she was, had left traces that refused to vanish. Tiny scraps of folded paper tucked into the most mundane places, under the edge of a table, inside a hollowed-out log, between the pages of a well-worn book. Each letter carried Thomas's handwriting, delicate, curling, almost tender, but also coated with riddles and longing, fragments of moments only they had shared. Lillian discovered the first one by accident, peeking under the floorboard in the kitchen where Clara had often slipped away to write. The words were simple, yet devastating. I see you, even when you hide. The night cannot hide what the day cannot claim. Imagine Lillian's heart in that moment. It wasn't just a pang of sorrow. It was a sharp, twisting ache, a combination of fear, anger, and helpless longing. She understood, immediately, that her daughter had not left simply out of youthful curiosity. No, this was something else, something more dangerous. And Thomas, he was at the center of it, as he always had been, quiet and deliberate. But capable of stirring emotions that neither mother nor daughter could resist. As the days passed, Lillian began to notice the small moments that had once gone unnoticed. A glance shared across the courtyard, a brush of fingers as letters were exchanged, the faint echo of laughter in places where no one should have been. Every detail became magnified, every gesture significant. You see, fear has a way of sharpening perception. Every whisper, every movement, every shadow becomes a message, a warning, a clue. And Lillian began to realize that she was no longer merely observing. She was participating in a delicate, dangerous dance, choreographed by longing, secrecy, and unspoken rules. Meanwhile, Clara's fascination with Thomas deepened. She lingered near the same hidden spots her mother once used, heart racing each time she thought she saw him, every shadow transformed into possibility. There was something intoxicating about the way he moved through the world, self-contained yet profoundly attentive, strong yet tender. It was the kind of presence that left a mark, one that burned slowly, invisibly into the memory, and Clara, in her audacious youth, was drawn to it like a moth to a flame, unmindful of the danger, unmindful of the consequences. Letters became their lifeline. Lillian found more cryptic notes hidden beneath floorboards, in hollow logs, inside books. Thomas's words spoke to both women in ways they could barely admit to themselves: longing, frustration, secret desires, moments of tenderness. One read, I have seen both of you separately, together, in ways no one else can know. The world outside may condemn, but here, in the shadows, I am with you both. The words made Lillian's chest tighten. She understood that Thomas's loyalty, or his fascination, was divided. And yet, as much as she feared it, as much as she wanted to forbid her daughter from this dangerous game, there was also a part of her that ached with longing for the connection she had once shared with him. Every whispered conversation, every secret touch, every stolen moment in the shadows had been a lifeline in a world that sought to control and dehumanize them. The plantation itself became a stage for this tension. Each room, each hallway, each courtyard was charged with unspoken emotion. Every meal felt like a test. Who would sit where? Who would glance at whom? Who would notice the letters tucked beneath the plates? Lillian would watch Clara across the table, noting the quick flicker of her eyes, the faintest smile that seemed to acknowledge a secret no one else could see. And Thomas, he moved through it all with that same quiet presence, careful not to be obvious, yet impossible to ignore. One afternoon, Lillian caught Clara lingering near the back edge of the fields, where the wildflowers grew thick. She remembered standing in the very same spot years ago, feeling Thomas's gaze on her, feeling that forbidden thrill that came with secrecy. Clara was pretending to pick flowers, but her eyes were scanning the horizon, waiting, hoping. Lillian called her softly, but Clara only looked back once, a small, mischievous smile curling her lips. That smile, the same one Lillian had worn decades earlier, was both a comfort and a terror. She realized with a sinking feeling that her daughter had inherited more than beauty. She had inherited the same dangerous hunger. The nights were the worst. In the dim candlelight of their rooms, letters would appear or disappear mysteriously. A scrap of paper might be found under a pillow or wedged in a book, folded into a shape that seemed almost playful, almost mocking, and always the words carried the same tension. I see you, I know you, the shadows belong to no one, and yet I give them to you. The air itself seemed to thrum with unspoken desires. Lillian could feel it pressing on her chest, heavy and relentless, making her heartbeat echo in her ears. Clara, she knew, felt it too, that same invisible pull, that same thrilling danger that came with every glance, every touch, every word Thomas left behind. It was a dance, a precarious, intoxicating dance on a knife's edge, and Lillian knew that one wrong step could shatter everything. And then there were moments of confrontation, small, delicate, almost imperceptible. One evening, Lillian followed Clara quietly across the veranda, down the narrow hallway, into the courtyard where moonlight spilled like silver over the cobblestones. She saw her daughter slip her hand into a hidden nook, retrieving a folded letter that smelled faintly of tobacco and lilacs. Lillian didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply watched, heart constricting, understanding the depth of what her daughter had found, what her daughter had risked. It was during these nights that the unspoken triangle revealed its full complexity. Thomas, aware of both women, navigating between their worlds with subtle gestures, delicate touches, small words spoken just loud enough to be overheard, but never fully. He was a man balancing desire and danger, love and secrecy, in a way that few could comprehend, and both women, one mother, one daughter, were caught in that delicate web, aware of the peril yet powerless to resist it. Lillian tried to assert control, tried to protect her daughter without confronting her, tried to manage her own feelings without surrendering to them. But the heart is rarely obedient. Desire does not listen to reason, and the more Lillian tried to distance herself, the more the tension thickened, winding tighter around her chest, around her family, around the walls of that ancient, secret-laden house. By the time the river became a recurring motif in their lives, every shadow along its mossy edge seemed to hold a story. Every ripple of water carried the faint memory of Thomas's touch. Every rustle of leaves whispered a promise. Every bird call in the twilight hinted at the unspoken drama unfolding. The plantation, with its heavy walls and strict rules, was powerless against the human heart. It could dictate labor, it could punish transgressions, but it could not govern longing, curiosity, or the deep, dangerous ache of love that dared to ignore propriety. Lillian often found herself sitting by the fire at night, letters in her lap, candlelight flickering across the worn furniture. She would trace the curls of Thomas's handwriting with a trembling finger, feeling both sorrow and jealousy, pride and helplessness all at once. And Clara was learning the same lessons in her own way, discovering how fragile desire could be, how intoxicating and how devastating when denied or misinterpreted. As the weeks stretched into months, the tension became unbearable. Each meeting, each glance, each secret exchange felt like a gamble with fate. And fate, in that fragile, sun-dappled corner of the world, has a way of testing hearts to their breaking points. The shadows lengthened. The nights grew heavier. The letters became more urgent, more tender, more dangerous. And Thomas, ever watchful, ever deliberate, continued to move between them, the invisible axis around which their hearts spun, uncertain, trembling and irrevocably bound. By now, Lillian had begun to understand something profound. This was no longer a story of youthful indiscretion or fleeting desire. This was something older, something deeper, something that would leave scars no one outside the walls of the plantation could ever fully see. It was a story of longing that defied rules, a love that could not be contained, and a tension that threatened to explode in ways that were as inevitable as they were terrifying. And yet, even in the fear, even in the ache of jealousy and longing, there was beauty. A beauty that came from the courage to feel, the audacity to desire, and the stubborn refusal to let the harshness of the world dictate the heart. The evening arrived quietly, almost innocuously, but the air carried a weight that pressed down on everything, on every breath, on every heartbeat. There was a strange stillness, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand upright, the kind of quiet that feels almost like anticipation itself is breathing in the same room with you. Lillian had sensed it long before the shadows began to stretch across the veranda. Something about this night was different, heavy with the unspoken, the unsaid, the inevitable. Clara had slipped away again, her footsteps, light and deliberate, the rustle of her skirts soft against the cobblestones. She had a sense of purpose in her stride, a quiet determination mingled with the thrill of the forbidden. She was heading to the river, the moss-covered hidden stretch where Thomas had promised to meet her. Lillian watched, heart hammering, hands clutching the railing until her knuckles were pale. Every instinct screamed at her to call out, to chase after her daughter, to stop what she could not even name. Thomas was already there when Clara arrived, leaning casually against a tree, though there was nothing casual about his posture. Every line of his body spoke of strength and careful control, yet there was a vulnerability in his eyes, dark and unreadable. The river ran beside them, whispering against the rocks in a soft, continuous murmur, carrying with it the scents of wet earth and moss, the faint metallic tang of life moving on unseen currents. It was a beautiful, quiet place, and yet that beauty only heightened the tension, the sense of danger lurking just beyond perception. Clara laughed softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, unaware, or perhaps knowingly indifferent, to the peril of the moment. Thomas reached for her hand. It was a slow, deliberate gesture, full of meaning and restraint, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to freeze. The rustle of the leaves, the distant echo of a whip in the fields, even the murmur of the river, all of it faded into the background. All that remained was the trembling, fragile connection between them, electric and terrifying. Lillian's breath caught. She could feel it, the pull between them, the dangerous intimacy, the way the shadows seemed to twist and stretch around this impossible tableau. Her heart ached, a mixture of fear, longing, and disbelief. Not just desire, not just love. There was something more profound here. Recognition, guilt, perhaps even fear. And in that instant she realized she had no control. The world outside could dictate rules, punishments, expectations. But here, at the edge of the river, none of it mattered. And then, they vanished. It happened almost imperceptibly, as if the world itself had chosen to erase them. One moment, Clara's hand rested in Thomas's, fingers entwined, the sunlight catching the soft curve of her smile. The next, they were gone. The river ran dark and silent, the moss swaying gently in the breeze, the shadows long and accusing. Lillian ran, screaming their names until her voice cracked, her chest burning with desperation. She searched the riverbank, the surrounding woods, the fields stretching into darkness. Every rock, every tree, every shadow was a potential hiding place. But they were gone, leaving only the echo of what had been. The plantation became a different place after that night. Silence hung heavier than the humid summer air. The walls seemed to remember, the floors seemed to whisper, and every step Lillian took carried the memory of absence. Nights stretched into weeks, weeks into months, and still there was no sign of Thomas, no trace of Clara. The letters stopped. Footsteps ceased. The house, once alive with whispered secrets and stolen glances, became hollow, haunted by the memory of what had been and what could never be reclaimed. Lillian tried to convince herself of explanations. Perhaps they had run away together. Perhaps they had been taken by someone. Perhaps fate itself had intervened. But none of it sufficed. The questions gnawed at her, insistent and merciless. Had someone seen? Had someone followed? Had they left willingly, or had something darker intervened? Every thought twisted in her chest, every imagined scenario cutting sharper than the last. She wanned, aired the plantation at all hours, retracing paths she had known for years. The veranda where she had watched Clara slip away, the hidden corners where letters had been passed, the mossy edge of the river. All of it became sacred and cursed ground simultaneously. Every footprint in the mud, every faint indentation on a branch, every ripple of the water seemed to carry secrets she could no longer read. The days grew long and monotonous. Servants moved silently, careful not to draw attention to the house's new emptiness. The master of the plantation continued his duties, oblivious or indifferent to the delicate fractures forming in his household. And Lillian, she existed in a liminal space between despair and hope, between memory and reality, haunted by the absence of the ones she loved. Sometimes late at night she would find herself clutching scraps of letters, faded and frayed, discovering lines she had never noticed before. I give the shadows to you. They belong to no one, yet they are ours. Even when apart, know that I see you. The words were Thomas's, unmistakable in their delicacy, and they cut her with the simultaneous balm of tenderness and the ache of impossibility. She would sit by the fireplace, staring into the dancing flames, replaying the moments she had witnessed by the river, the gentle touch, the soft laughter, the almost imperceptible shift of the world around them, and she would ask herself, over and over, the question that would never leave her: where did they go? Did they find freedom, or did the shadows consume them? In the months that followed, Lillian began noticing small, almost imperceptible reminders of their existence. A faint scent of lilacs drifting in from an open window, the soft impression of a footprint in the clay along the riverbank, a letter tucked away that she had never found before. It was as if the world refused to let her forget them, as if the river itself carried whispers of their presence, just beyond reach, teasing her with the memory of what had been. And yet, in this emptiness, there was also something else, a lesson, subtle and unyielding. Lillian realized that love, in its purest form, could not be bound by law, by propriety, or even by fear. Desire does not respect rules. Longing does not bow to expectation. And though their disappearance left scars, though the world continued to demand obedience and submission, the memory of those stolen moments, of the intensity and purity of their forbidden connections, remained indelible. The plantation became a monument to absence, to the power of what is felt rather than what is recorded. Every corner, every hallway, every shadow seemed to whisper the story of a mother, a daughter, and a man whose lives had intertwined in ways no ledger, no record, no law could capture. History might forget the names, forget the faces, but the echoes of longing, desire, and courage, those could never be erased. And so Lillian waited, and remembered, and mourned. She traced the lines of letters long gone, revisited the riverbank in the early morning light, listened to the whisper of the wind through the mossy trees. She understood, in a way that is only granted through grief and love, that some stories are not meant to end. They linger like shadows, like ghosts, like the faint laughter and whispered promises of people who dared to love, even when the world sought to deny them. In that space, between memory and absence, between shadow and light, the story of Lillian, Clara, and Thomas remained alive. And anyone who walks by that river, who listens closely to the rustle of leaves or the ripple of water, might just hear it too, the echo of a love that could not be contained, that defied rules, and that ultimately vanished into the night, leaving only questions, longing, and the indelible mark of hearts that dared to feel,